So while Akbar was promoting um, peace between Hindus and Muslims, one of his descendants, Aurangzeb, would expand the Mughal Empire into southern India, but do so with an iron fist. He was quite hostile to Hinduism. He kind of stepped back on Akbar's policy of toleration and said, no, 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 we need to ensure that these people are converted to Islam. I am a devout Muslim. There should not be a Hinduism in our country or in our empire. So he demolished Hindu temples, replaced them with mosques, and even taxed Hindus to encourage conversion. So this would cause a lot of tensions in India, and a lot of rebellions would come out from this policy that he practiced. So some common things we're going to see between the Ottomans, the Safavids, and the Mughals. All empires, we're going back to looking at what makes an empire, what makes them imperial. They base and they expand their power through their militaries. They used gunpowder technology to do it. We call these three the gunpowder empires because they relied on gunpowder from China and used it in weapons form. The prestige of the dynasty was dependent on piety and military prowess of the ruler. So the Ghazi tradition, or Sufism as it was in the Safavid Empire. So you were devoutly religious, and you swore allegiance to the ruler, and you swore allegiance to Islam, and you would spread your empire to also spread Islam for your king. They all had their roots in Turkish traditions. A lot of them would have difficulties with power succession, so you'd see, the Sultan massacring uh, people who he didn't want to ascend to power or even challenge his power. And there was difficulty controlling wealthy landowners who had a lot of power over and authority in religious matters. They're quite difficult to manage. Here's just an example. We've been talking about the gunpowder empires. This is the Janissary Corps, who were pretty much the devout followers and military leaders for the Ottoman Empire. On the right is the Dardanelles gun, which would be used in major sieges. It's massive. It weighs tons, and if you look it up online, it's just massive. There's one similar to it on display, I think, in front of the Kremlin in Russia. From right, it's huge. It caused enormous damage to castle walls. So castles became obsolete with the advent of gunpowder technologies. So women would also would have a large deal of political power in the Ottoman Empire and within a lot of the empires, the gunpowder empires. They were officially banned from political activity, but some rights were given to women, but was still with some restrictions to Sharia or religious law. Um, so again, in the steppe culture, there's a tradition of revering mothers, especially from the Mongols, that mothers are very important to the cultures of these places. He essentially revered his mother and his first wife. So a lot of these cultures would continue that practice. Um, the Suleiman the Magnificent would often defer his power to his favorite concubine, who I believe was a Ukrainian. Yep, Roxolana. He basically said and elevated her to the level of wife, consulted her on policies of the state, deferred her judgment even to the point of executing his eldest son for treason when Hurrem wanted him eliminated to secure the succession of her own child. So his son with his wife was executed because his concubine, who he loved the most, didn't like him. So it just shows you the amount of power that women played in these societies, and it extended into, if you read on 683, into other facets and into other empires as well. And in fact, the Taj Mahal was dedicated by a Safavid empire, not a Safavid, a Mughal empire, to his wife who had died. It's quite magnificent. This is just a picture of Suleiman the Magnificent, who we've been talking about. Great hat. Someone mentioned that he looked like Toadstool from the Mario Kart series. Yeah, I could see it. He's got a vest and a hat. Great hat. Anyways, so American crops in the Arab world, or not the Arab world, but in the gunpowder empires would have less of a dramatic impact on the Muslim empires, and there's several reasons for this. But they would bring coffee to this region from Ethiopia, which was originally in Ethiopia, and become very popular. Tobacco from the Americas would eventually be grown in this region as well. Um, they didn't want. There was a lot of conservatives who feared coffee houses and the impact caffeine had on the people and the addiction that it might, as well as smoking, that they can indulge their appetites for caffeine and nicotine at the same time. That they're essentially, you know, foregoing other obligations. So. Population growth also reflects territorial additions and losses. So most of the growth that happened in this region wasn't because of the introduction of new foods, but it was because of the territorial conflicts and acquisition of new territories that populations grew, because they were absorbing new people into their empires. It wasn't so much because of food crops that had been discovered, but more so because of the capturing of new territories. So you'd also see some large-scale trade with the English East India Company, the French East India Company, and the Dutch East India Company. So there would be trade that would continue between these groups even after, even during this period. So you see some pretty substantial growth in the Mughal Empire, but in the Ottomans Empire, you'd see kind of an increase and then a decrease, and because they'd gain territory and lose territory. And the Safavids, which were a very small empire, you'd see some kind of growth and then decay and then growth again as a result of their empires kind of ebbing and flowing in their size. So also to kind of go back to agriculture and trade, the East India Company, the French East India Company, and the Dutch East, they all coveted a lot of what these, especially silk, carpets, ceramics, all things that tend to come from these areas. They hoped to curry favor from these people by giving them gunpowder technology and military technology, and it was largely successful. The Mughals didn't pay as much attention to trade as the Ottomans and Safavids did, partly because they felt like, our economy, India, can take care of itself. We're more concentrated on ourselves. We'll let them come to us. We don't really have any interest in what they have to offer. And Christianity was also something that these trading companies brought with them. But much like what we saw in Japan and China, they had little success because the Christian monastic orders had this, they were just there to create a favorable environment for trade. And it was difficult for them to establish, religious conversion in this region because they were seen more as they were more cool to them than others during this period. So and I'll continue on with this. So the Ottoman Empire had a large population of Christians and Jews, and there's a big debate over large-scale massacre of Christian Armenians and Jewish Armenians around World War I, and recognizing that as genocide or not. But we'll get to that issue later in history. The Safavid Empire was mostly Zoroastrians. Yes, they're still in the Middle East. They were heavily persecuted. Jews and Christians. Mughal Empire, Hindus, Jains, Zoroastrians, Christians, and Sikhs, which is a new religion in this region. It's a syncretic religion that would exist in this region. So Mughal Akbar would be the most tolerant of the religious leaders in this region. He received Jesuits politely, but resented the Christian exclusivity. So the Christians, especially the Portuguese in Goa, had set up a Christian mission in India, hoping to convert the population to Christianity. Well, unfortunately, like in Japan and China, they felt like, hey, you guys are too exclusive. We feel like you're not really... The philosophical discussions basically meant that if you want to become a Christian, you have to convert fully to Christianity, and they didn't really support that wholeheartedly. Um, they were enthusiastic about the syncretic Sikhism, which kind of combined elements of Hinduism and Islam, and he hoped to use this, Akbar, to kind of support his own efforts in bringing unity to the Islam and Hinduism. So, a status of religious minority. So non-Muslims were protected people, but they were known as dhimmi. And essentially they'd have to pay a special tax called the jizya. And they were free to worship, they're free to own property, they had legal rights, but they were forced to pay this consistent tax. And this policy existed in the Ottoman Empire. And essentially, this policy still exists in some areas of the Islamic world. So the Ottoman communities and the millet system of self-administration. So the millet system essentially gave autonomy to Christian communities, Jewish communities, and basically said, okay, you can administer yourselves as long as you pledge your loyalty to the ruler. And that's how it worked in the Ottoman Empire. Mughal Empire was a little different. The millet system was not very practical because there's just so many different cultural religious groups that they couldn't really allow people to retain their own autonomy and be decentralized like that. So Mughal rulers, Muslims were supreme, but they worked alongside Hindus, and this was promoted under Akbar, that we need this policy of tolerance, that we need to work together, we need to have debates, we need to tolerate one another. Well, Akbar would essentially abolish the practice of he'd abolish the jizya, the tax on non-Muslims. But when Aurangzeb became the ruler of the Ottoman Empire, he was zealous, he was a devout Muslim, and he wanted to satisfy the zealots in his country and say, look, we have to ensure that Islam is the most powerful and dominant religion in the Indian subcontinent. So he reinstated the jizya tax onto non-Muslims and continued this policy. And it caused tension between Muslims and Hindus in the region. So several capital cities that were quite important to this period in history. Istanbul was a cultural capital of the Ottoman Empire. We're going to look at some of the massive monumental architecture in just a moment. They rededicated the Hagia Sophia church as Hagia Sophia, a mosque. So if you go to the Hagia Sophia today, you can see that there's a place of prayer in one area that faces towards Mecca. There's Islamic artwork around, but it also has Byzantine art and Byzantine mosaics alongside it. It's very beautiful to see. Isfahan would become the major Persian city in the Safavid Empire. Another magnificent town. A lot of it, the inhabitants still boast, Isfahan is half the world. So they had markets, large palaces, a royal mosque, a polo field, public squares, so very well organized. Akbar built a magnificent Fatehpur Sikri in India, and he chose sites without sufficient water supply, so unfortunately it would be abandoned. But the Taj Mahal would become kind of an icon of this region, just absolutely magnificent. And it's a combination of Hindu architecture and Muslim architecture. So you'll see mosaics, but alongside you'll see a lot of the spires, as you see on the right. That's definitely a Hindu style of architecture. So you're starting to see, because of where this is, you're starting to see a combination of artistic styles because of the combination of religions and religious groups living alongside one another. The same in Istanbul. You see a combination of Muslim style architecture and Byzantine style architecture with the use of domes. The large round domes is a Byzantine style of art, but you'll see mosaics and you'll see large spires as well here. So you see this blending not only of religions but of our architecture as well. So we'll stop here. We'll pick up on the lecture in just a moment.